Good morning, Bio30s. Today we are moving on to the cell division part of our reproduction and development and cell division unit, and we're going to be discussing the cell cycle. So here I have for us our cell cycle notes guide. And well, what is the cell cycle? It's like the life cycle of a cell, the sequence of events from one cell division to the next. And so you'll find this stuff in your textbook, and there's some really nice pictures in your textbook, page 550 to 555. And it just goes through and it's going to walk you through the different stages of the cell cycle and what you need to know what happens in each of the stages. So you can actually practice drawing the cell cycle. Some people like to do it like the diagram shown here. It looks kind of like a little clock and it shows the different stages. Others like to kind of do it more like the next page here shows, and this is not in your notes, I just cut and pasted this out of your textbook, but it just looks like a little pie chart. And a lot of students actually find maybe it's a little easier to understand the cell cycle when they draw it out and practice naming and labeling the different events. So question 1 here is asking about why is it important that the DNA gets copied before the cell divides? Well, that's huge, right? The DNA has to get copied first during interphase, the synthesis phase of interphase, to make sure that when the cell divides, each new daughter cell has the right amount of DNA. If that doesn't happen, then the cell doesn't have the right amount of DNA and it will not work or will not function correctly. So you can practice drawing out the cell cycle, and I've got that here for you. So I just do it like a little pie chart. For me, that's how I remember it. And you'll notice that the majority of the cell's lifespan is spent in interphase. And that is the non-dividing phase. Now, scientists originally they thought that the cell wasn't doing anything. They called it the resting phase, which is a load of bunk because the cell's actually very busy. It is undergoing growth and making proteins, normal cell activities, things like cell respiration and all the metabolic activities that are going on. And that happens in G1 or GAP1. And then S, synthesis. This is a super huge important phase because this is when the DNA of the nucleus is copied, it's replicated, in order that when the cell divides, each of the daughter cells has enough DNA to function. And then again, doesn't look like the cell's doing anything, but in G2 or GAP2, cell's growing, it's preparing for mitosis, the cell division stage. So interphase is very important. Even though it doesn't look like the cell is doing anything, the cell is very busy with a lot of metabolic processes. Okay, so what about the actual cell division? Well, the actual cell division stages, that is happening in mitosis M. And also cytokinesis. And you'll notice that this is only about 10% of the life cycle. So the actual division of the nucleus, the chromosomes, and then the rest of the cell, the cytoplasm and all the organelles, that's only about 10% of the life cycle. And the cell is proceeding through these events, and some cells it takes a long time to divide. Other cells it's going to be a lot quicker. Some cells in your body, like your brain cells, they never divide, and you still though need to know these different events in interphase, mitosis, cytokinesis. Now, that being said, I just wanted to draw your attention to an update that we got. And this outcome in our curriculum, you don't actually have to know G1, S, or G2 of interphase. It's okay, you just calling it interphase. But if you are going on to any university class, you will be asked in detail about those. And so that's why I cover it. So they can't ask you that on the diploma, but they can, and you will see that in class evaluations. Also, cytokinesis, which is that phase of the division of the cytoplasm and organelles, a lot of people consider that to be part of mitosis. So you might see mitosis divided up into its stages. And then after that last stage, so it goes prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, then you might also see cytokinesis, and it may be considered part of mitosis. Okay, so just be aware of that. And sometimes you might see cytokinesis as a separate stage. Doesn't matter. Both are acceptable ways of drawing that out. Okay, so what are the events that take place? Well, I just kind of walked you through that, and so you will have to review the different events. And then, as I mentioned also, mitosis has 4 stages: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. And we'll be going into a lot of detail on this in next week. You're just need to know kind of the basics and the sequence, the order of what they're happening. So one year I had a student who memorized its PMAT, and they said, oh, I can remember that. Please make a taco. So P for prophase, M for metaphase, A for anaphase, T for telophase. So you need to know the order and kind of the main things happening in each of those. And like I said, we'll go into more detail on that next week. But like I said, scientists used to just call this interphase a resting phase, which is not actually true. But the cell's not dividing during that time, so you can't see anything happening in the nucleus. The chromosomes aren't moving around. The DNA and the nuclear material exists as chromatin and not as chromosomes. So it's kind of a misleading term that the cell's actually very busy, but you can't see any of this happening under the microscope. There's all sorts of stuff happening like cell respiration, protein synthesis, growth, but you can't see that at all. And so they used to call it a resting phase, which is not accurate at all. So a couple other words that you need to know for terminology. Chromatin, that's the non-condensed form of genetic material, and it just looks like a ball of string. The genetic material, the DNA, is long and stringy, and most of the cell cycle interphase, this is how your genetic material, your DNA, exists. When the cell's getting ready to divide, it starts to condense. It gets shorter and fatter, and now we term this a chromosome. And so during mitosis, that's typically when you're going to see our genetic material as a chromosome. Some more words and terminology you need to know is the difference between chromosome and chromatid. So at the chromosome, as we mentioned, this is our genetic material as it exists generally during mitosis and cell division, and it's duplicated. You can see that there are these two kind of propeller-looking little structures, and when we talk about a chromatid, that is unduplicated genetic material. It's kind of like half of a chromosome. I had one student one year called it a chroma kid. It's like half of a full chromosome. All right, so as you are reading through this material and you're learning the details, this is what your textbook shows for the events in mitosis, and it goes through each of the stages. And this is found in your textbook on page 557. Like I said, we're going to go into more detail and talk about what's going on. So you see two different things here. You see kind of the cartoon version of the drawing, and it's got a bunch of different labels on it, and then what an actual cell would look like, whether this is a plant cell or an animal cell. This is an actual picture photomicrograph taken from a real cell. So you need to be able to draw out and label and know the basic events that's happening in each of these. So here's just a copy of the answer key, and these are my little sketches. So practice out what's going on, what are the key words that you need to know: chromatin, chromosome, etc., and be able to sketch and draw and label and know the important events of interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. Those are the events of mitosis. Okay, so I have one more video for you guys. We're going to go through quickly the cell cycle, showing a little video animation. And until then, if you have questions, michelle.ledeen@ghsd75.ca. Talk to you later.